Good afternoon. I'm Jennifer Deese, Director and Associate Dean for Stanford Continuing Studies. Thank you for joining us today for Discover Stanford for You. We are excited to bring you this event, which is being co-sponsored by Continuing Studies and by the Office of External Relations. And I'd now like to introduce Jenny Martinez, the Richard E. Lang Professor of Law and Dean of Stanford Law School. Welcome.
Thank you so much, and welcome to everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you on behalf of Stanford Law School and Stanford University to this program. We'll highlight one of Stanford Law School's signature programs, the Community Law Clinic. Stanford Law School, as many of you may know, is one of the country's leading law schools with one of the smallest student bodies. And we have a number of programs that take advantage of that small size in order to allow our students to work in small teams, in experiential learning, in close collaboration with our faculty. We have a bunch of different programs that students can take advantage of during their time at Stanford Law School that are quite innovative in terms of that experiential learning, in which students are both able to develop their skills as future lawyers and also to contribute to real-world problems while they're here at the law school. Outside of class credit, our students do pro bono work for I think last year it was 19,000 hours of free legal services that they provided through our pro bono program. We have a policy lab program in which our students have worked on hundreds of different policy-oriented projects for external partners like state and local government and nonprofit organizations working under the close supervision of faculty. And then our signature experiential learning program is the Stanford Law School Clinical Program, in which we have 11 different full-time clinics in which students enroll for a quarter with no other classes and spend all of their time working intensively on real cases under the close supervision of our faculty, delivering legal services to people who need it. And these clinics are unique in that they're full-time. At most law schools in the country, a clinic might be almost like an externship where you go for a few hours a week to an office to do some hands-on legal work. But for us, it's a full-time endeavor, and the clinics cover a wide range of topics from environmental law to immigration to religious liberty. But one of our oldest clinic, and one of the ones that we're going to talk about today, is the Community Law Clinic, which was first launched nearly 40 years ago. And when it was first launched, it was led by students with faculty support. It was originally known as the East Palo Alto Community Law Clinic, and it remains true in its current form as the Community Law Clinic to its founding mission, which is to provide legal services to our neighboring communities around the Stanford campus, and also to create unparalleled learning opportunities for our students that they then carry forward into their careers, whatever career path they choose, whether they go into legal services work or public interest, or whether they go to law firms and do pro bono work, helping people who can't afford lawyers as part of their careers, and instilling that value of public service as core to the legal profession in all of our graduates, whether they're headed to the public or private sector. Today, the Community Law Clinic is led by Professor Juliette Brody. Professor Brody first joined the Stanford Law faculty in 2006. She's currently the Peter E. Haas Faculty Director of the Haas Center for Public Service for Stanford University, working with students around campus as well as not just law students anymore. And from 2013 to 2019, she served as Associate Dean of Clinical Education for the law school and director of our Mills Legal Clinic, which is the umbrella for all of those clinics that I mentioned previously. Prior to coming to SLS, Professor Brody held positions at the University of Wisconsin Law School and the University of Michigan Law School. She was also Assistant Attorney General for the state of Wisconsin. With that, Professor Brody, I will turn it over to you for this exciting presentation.
Thank you so much, Dean Martinez. Thanks so much, Jenny. It's such an honor to be here, and I want to thank Continuing Studies for inviting the Community Law Clinic to be one of your featured programs as we help people understand the impact that Stanford, its students, and its programs can have on our local communities and our world. I'm just so honored to be here, and I want to thank my co-presenters, whom I'll be introducing in a moment, to be in conversation about the work that we do at the Community Law Clinic. As Jenny said, the Community Law Clinic is the oldest community-engaged experiential learning program at the law school, having started as the East Palo Alto Community Law Project. It was started by students who, as part of a nationwide insistence that legal education become responsive to community needs and real-world problems, Stanford launched the Community Law Project. I am lucky enough to have served as the faculty director of the clinic now entirely in-house since, as Jenny said, 2006. But we remain true to the core values of clinical legal education around the nation, which is to twin up and pair. Law students need to put their academic learning into practice and the needs of local communities and farther abroad communities for legal services in a legal market that does not provide access for everyone who needs a lawyer. Clinical legal education is the marriage of these two needs, of law students for practical education and of communities for free legal representation. The Community Law Clinic now remains Stanford's signature program in the local communities that surround our campus. We practice right now in 3 subject matter areas, and I have a student here who's practiced in all of them. We do eviction defense, which I think is the topic we're going to focus on today. As we all know, the housing crisis, the affordability crisis that continues to affect our region and many others around the country. But we also practice in what we call post-conviction relief matters. These are expungement matters where our students represent folks who have completed their sentences, whether it be for jail time or probation, and yet remain subject to the collateral consequences of criminal convictions that prevent them from accessing housing, employment, credit, etc. Our students represent folks in clearing those criminal records. And finally, the third subject matter is Social Security disability, where we represent folks with disabling conditions that prevent them from participating in the wage economy, who nevertheless have been denied access to public benefits. And our students represent those clients in hearings to establish that, in fact, they have disabling conditions that entitle them to subsistence income to enable them to live a life despite not being able to work. My personal expertise has been in housing work ever since I was a clinic student 100 years ago, when I did my first ever jury trial was on behalf of 2 tenants who had fallen behind in rent, but whose apartment was in such bad condition that we were able to defend against that eviction by asserting that the landlord had failed to keep the premises up to legal code. And we were able to convince the jury that they should not be evicted on that basis. And ever since that trial, again, decades ago, I've been really committed to doing this work and to offering to our students at Stanford the kind of transformational educational experience that I had as a second-year law student so many years ago. I know that we want to focus on housing cases today. And let me describe a little bit of what's happening with eviction practice here in the Bay Area right now. We at the Community Law Clinic practice principally in San Mateo County when it comes to eviction defense. In our other practice areas, we have a wider Bay Area view. But for our eviction cases, we are in San Mateo County. And I'm so thrilled to welcome to this conversation in a moment, Stacy Hauber, an SLS alum from, let me look at my notes, 1987, I think, who is the director of the Legal Aid Society of San Mateo County, and with whom we partner very closely in representing tenants in San Mateo County. In San Mateo County, there are, well, let me go back and say, eviction defense in the nation and in California and in San Mateo County, bringing that sort of regional frame inward, we are in what we all consider an acute post-COVID environment. That is to say, over the years of 2020, 2021, 2022, we saw in this nation and in this state and in San Mateo County, unprecedented government innovation in responding publicly to a housing crisis. That is to say, when COVID struck and the shutdown orders were issued, and our essential workers, our clients, kept working, but many of them were also sent home, there was just this enormous crisis in our economy that led inevitably to the non-payment of rent. Our nation, our state, our county responded to that with investment of public money, that is tax dollars. $46 billion of federal money went into rental assistance. At the state level, we saw statutory reform to pause eviction matters during the pandemic. And locally, we saw city councils and the county board of supervisors also respond, all in an effort to operationalize a recognition that tenants were falling behind in rent for no fault of their own. And it was not just to put them out on the street in that environment, and particularly where being put out could subject them and the rest of the community to public health catastrophe. By the same token, our government agencies recognized that landlords were entitled to income on their side. We couldn't just have mortgages go unpaid, notes unmet. And so we collectivized, propping up essentially the real estate industry and invested publicly in making those landlords whole with government money that tenants were, for the time being during the pandemic, unable to pay. Now, why am I going into this detail? Because what we are experiencing now in San Mateo County is the expiration of essentially all of those protections. We who are practicing, and you'll hear from a student in a moment who's practiced in this environment, we no longer have access to public funds or to arguments that protect our clients from non-payment of rent, even though many of them still are suffering the downstream effects of the pandemic economy. We are back to the world where if you don't pay your rent, even though it wasn't quote unquote your fault, you got laid off for no reason of your own, you faced health care expense, you faced a car repair expense, your kids got sick and you couldn't go to work. These are the reasons you fell behind in rent. These are no longer defenses. And so we are supervising students who are counseling and representing clients who are facing this very harsh reality and really having an end to a compassionate period that was represented by some of the COVID protections. I love doing this work, even though it's heartbreaking. I mean, I literally am counseling clients and helping students counsel clients to understand that they don't have good options here. This is sort of, we analogize it, of course, to medical education, where we're counseling terminal patients. You know, how do you, as a lawyer, you've exhausted your creativity, you've read all the statutes, you've availed yourself of every defense. And at this moment, we're choosing between bad options. We're moving clients into shelters. I have one client who's now living in her car. It's a bad time in San Mateo County, and I don't want to kid you about it. And law students are seeing that in real time, learning the limits of the law, but also learning that they can make a difference. Even if there's no perfect solution, it certainly is better to go through this experience of eviction with a lawyer by your side, someone whom you can count on to be telling it to you straight, giving you good information that you can rely on, can translate some of the very complicated, very fast legal events that are happening that feel like they're happening to you. To have a lawyer at your side whom you know is on your side makes a huge difference. So to return to where I started, clinical legal education lives at this meeting place between students' need to learn what it means to be a lawyer in the real world. They've mastered the classroom environment. They're academically incredibly gifted, but now they need to see those gifts come to bear in the real world, in San Mateo courts with real clients. So the marriage between that pedagogical imperative to prepare lawyers to actually practice law and the desperate need for our community to have lawyers who stand ready to go with these low-income clients into these often very dangerous waters, and if nothing else, help them understand what is going on and feel confident that they're getting the best help that they can. Does it solve every problem? Of course not. Do we spend time at the community law clinic thinking through what would some policy solutions be based on what we see every day in the courts here and with these clients? What would we tell the state legislature? What do we want the county board of supervisors to know about the post-COVID economy and what's happening in housing in San Mateo County? Of course we do those things, but our core role is to represent these folks one by one, preventing displacement one client at a time when we can. And I know Saraswati, the student who's here, can talk about her experience working with a family in this very difficult environment, but where having a lawyer can still make a difference. So let me bring in our guests. I'm so excited to welcome Stacy Hauver. I don't know if they're going to come onto the camera now, but Stacy has been a friend and colleague and co-conspirator for as long as I've been at Stanford. Stacy is an SLS alum from 1987. She's always embarrassed when we include that Stacy was #1 in her class at Stanford Law School. And when you think about all the options that someone who graduates #1 in her class at Stanford Law School has available, Stacy has dedicated her career to legal services for the poor, mostly here in San Mateo County. And I'm so thrilled to be able to introduce you to her so that you can get to know her a little bit. The Legal Aid Society of San Mateo County, of which Stacy is the executive director, is, I'll let her tell you about it, but it is our singular partner in our eviction defense work. We at the Community Law Clinic, we are not a high volume operation. For students to be able to do their work well, they each have 1 or 2 eviction cases at a time. But Stacy's shop, they are the high volume in the trenches all day, every week, week in and week out, really facing the eviction crisis in San Mateo County. So Stacy, welcome and thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Juliet. It's great to be here. And certainly the way you framed what's going on in San Mateo County today, I couldn't have done it better. I'll talk just for a minute about Legal Aid Society of San Mateo County. We are kind of an old-fashioned legal services organization, county-based, kind of war on poverty echoes, with a broad range of legal services. So we're not a specialist operation. We're a general poverty law organization with practices in housing, as we're going to talk about, but also in immigration law, healthcare, safety net benefits, including Social Security disability, as you mentioned earlier, special education and early intervention services for children with disabilities, and then a couple of other specialized population areas around seniors and also teen parents. So we're a broad-based organization with 16 attorneys, 37 staff total, and we've been in San Mateo County for more than 60 years.
Wow. How long have you been with the Legal Aid Society of San Mateo County? Tell us a little bit about your journey from the graduation stage in 1987 to today.
Not quite since I graduated. I did spend a year organizing in North Carolina, but then I've been at Legal Aid in San Mateo County since 1990, so a long time.
And why did you, as I said, you had so many options as an SLS alum, as an SLS graduate. Tell us a little bit about your personal story and commitments and why you dedicated your career to this kind of work.
I wasn't one of those people who enter law school knowing that what they want to do is practice public interest law in some way. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. But in my first year, I joined that then very young East Palo Alto Community Law Project crowd, which was a great cohort of people, and started doing work out in East Palo Alto. And honestly, the contrast couldn't have been more stark as you drive down University Avenue, passing out of Stanford and passing all of the large homes in Palo Alto. And then you cross the freeway and there you are in East Palo Alto, working with families in, living in very difficult living conditions, overcrowded conditions, facing a lot of different legal issues. And yet, the clients were really what made the difference for me, and I think made it stick as a career choice, because I just saw the incredible dedication to their families and to keeping their families fed and housed, and determination to make things work under very difficult circumstances, even to the point of and really feeling the dignity that was always there, and wanting to respect that and do what I could to help them solve problems. And what I think about is often is the way that when I would enter someone's home, I'd go to one of the apartments on Cooley to help them address a legal issue. They'd always offer me food, no matter how little there was in the household. I was offered food, and that generosity of spirit and dignity, in the face of really what seemed to me to be overwhelming problems, combined with the incredible contrast for the wealth that I saw in Palo Alto, is what made the career choice for me.
And that is still true today. I mean, I'm sitting out here at the Community Law Clinic, and we're just launching a new cohort of students who are starting this week. But last winter's cohort, we had a client who would bring to our office trays of Costco pastries that he wanted to deliver to make sure that the lawyers had sustenance and had a treat. And it was a way of showing his appreciation. So that going both ways, both in their home and also bringing stuff to our home. Stacy, let me ask you, one thing that we talk a lot about at the Community Law Clinic with these students who have so many choices is how to think about a balance between what we call a direct services career, that is the kind of day in, day out displacement, one family at a time work, versus so-called impact work, doing big class action work, whether the stereotypical or the prototypical being a Brown versus Board of Education. Instead of representing one student in a classroom in the South in the 50s, you take on the whole system with one grand legal theory. Your work has obviously been dedicated to the direct services model, but I wonder if you could say a little bit about that choice or how you see that those working in tandem.
Well, they're both incredibly important. And yes, I've stayed in the direct services environment, but at Legal Aid Society of San Mateo County, we've also always embraced impact litigation when it needed to be done, when that was the best way to resolve a problem. Sometimes it is. Sometimes that is the most effective and efficient way of addressing a problem. Sometimes policy work is the best, as you said, advocating with the state legislature or the board of supervisors. And we've followed all of those strategies when they were appropriate. But the core of what we do has always been direct services. And when we and that's where those problems surface. So we see that as an incredibly important part of the equation, because we're the ones who are seeing the problems that people are dealing with every day. And when we see those patterns develop and those trends develop, that's when we can say, oh, okay, there's something there. That policy has to be addressed, or that law is not being enforced correctly. And then we can move forward and try to get at it. And sometimes we undertake that ourselves, but more often we would either hand it off to a partner that really specializes in the impact litigation, or partner with them in that. We've done a lot of co-counseling on major litigation. We're still in a case involving the ACLU right now and some other organizations. So that's an important model. So it's all really important, and it all needs to be done. But I feel like it does come, the policy issues and the impact issues bubble up from direct services.
Let me close with you, Stacy, and then we'll bring Saraswati in by asking you to talk a little bit about the partnership between our organizations, that is between Legal Aid Society and Stanford, not just the Community Law Clinic, but Stanford University. How is that partnership from your side?
Well, certainly on the SCLC eviction defense side, it's incredibly important. As you said, we see that high volume eviction cases, which since since the end of those COVID protections has really been pretty overwhelming. The number of eviction cases that just come in the door every week, it can be dozens some weeks. And to be able to have that additional resource of well-trained, well-supervised students who can take on some of those cases is incredibly important. That really, we couldn't do it without SCLC. So that's really important. But there are other areas in which we intersect. One is that our medical legal partnership, which is the family advocacy program, has worked with the medical school over the years, and our attorneys have co-taught classes there on social determinants of health, helping doctors, or doctors to be better identify potential legal issues that might be affecting their client's health or their patient's health. And then, of course, also in the area of, as you train law students, they go out and they do internships, they do summer projects, and sometimes we have had the benefit of having Stanford students come in as summer law students on fellowships or even in a postgraduate fellowship, and that's an incredibly important resource for the field.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, let's bring one of those amazing students into the conversation. I think Saraswati's, I think you're already here. It's a little hard for me to tell what's happening technically, but Saraswati Rathod, welcome. Saraswati is currently a third-year law student at Stanford. She was one of those students who did a full-time immersive experience in the community law clinic as a 2L, and now has returned to us a few times, thankfully, as what we call an advanced student, coming back on a part-time basis to continue with the casework on her own and also to mentor the students who are coming right behind her in their own inaugural full-time experience. Saraswati is also, I'm proud to say, has made the decision to start her career in direct legal services in housing work in the Bay Area, and has accepted a job at the Law Foundation of Silicon Valley, which is sort of somewhat of a sibling to the Legal Aid Society of San Mateo County, but on the Santa Clara County side of the Bay Area, headquartered in San Jose. So she will be starting work there after passing the California bar exam this summer. So let's welcome Saraswati. Thank you so much for taking time out of your 3L spring to participate in the conversation.
Thank you for having me. It's a real honor to be on this panel with two incredible powerhouse housing attorneys. So I'm happy to be here.
Could I just ask you to start with a very general question about, tell the folks who are joining us a little bit about your CLC experience. What's it like to be a student in the community law clinic doing the eviction work, but also the post-conviction relief work, the disability rights work?
Yeah. So actually, if it's okay, I think it might be helpful to give a little bit of context for some of the reasons I came to law school, because I feel like the clinic has really helped me connect back with the reasons why I originally applied to law school.
Wonderful.
Okay. Yeah, so before I came to law school, I was working in the journalism industry, but volunteering on the side with an organization, a nonprofit in San Francisco called Open House, which is an elder care organization for LGBTQ elders in the San Francisco Bay Area. So they partner young LGBTQ people with elderly LGBTQ people. And so through that experience, I got to meet a lot of people who marched for my rights as a queer woman in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and who are also increasingly being priced out and pushed out of the Bay Area. A lot of the folks that I met who are personal local heroes of mine are also, living on food stamps and Section 8. So I came to law school with this particular community in mind. And when you first start law school, you're sort of just learning the basics of how to read case law and think like a judge. And it can feel sort of theoretical and very removed for someone who wants to, who imagines themselves as a lawyer who is more embedded in a community. And so coming to the Stanford Community Law Clinic was a real game changer for me because it was the first time I really felt like I was engaging with the communities that I had in mind when I came to law school, and actually meeting with clients and sitting down in a room with a client and talking through their legal problem. So yeah, the way it works is you come to clinic as a law student with a lot of experience sitting at a computer and reading cases and writing memos, and you are thrown into sort of a boot camp, which is designed by Juliet and the other supervising attorneys at the clinic. And you learn about disability law, you learn about expungements, you learn about evictions, and you practice, you do like a mock client interview. You sit down in a room, you practice saying, hello, my name is Saraswati. I'm a law student with the community law clinic. Tell me about what brought you in today. And then you're assigned to 3 cases. And you start meeting with clients, you learn how to explain the law in plain English. You learn how to celebrate good news with clients and deliver bad news. You bear witness to client stories about extreme income inequality, abusive power by landlords, by police. You bear witness to a lot of bureaucratic indifference, a lot of bureaucratic cruelty, and you learn from clients. So I have clients that often echo in my head in law school and in conversations with friends and family. One of those clients, just to give an example.
Yeah, I was gonna say it would be great if you could share some specifics.
Definitely, yeah. So I'll talk about the first eviction case that I worked on when I joined the clinic. So the context was that the state eviction moratorium had just recently expired. So tenants, when I joined the clinic, could be evicted for unpaid rent. Again, for the first time since the state eviction moratorium was in place. And so one of the, so I worked with a family of 5, an undocumented couple with 3 kids who were being evicted from their apartment for non-payment of rent. Their landlord claimed that they owed something like $20,000 of unpaid rent. And the conditions in their apartment were really awful. They had an electrical problem in their apartment that created an explosion risk that their landlord had refused to deal with. And they were also being sort of constantly harassed by their neighbors who were calling the police on them for really minor things and sort of personal disputes. And so they really wanted to move out of their apartment, but they had this accumulation of unpaid rent that their landlord wanted them to pay. And so there are sort of 2 types of deals that we often negotiate in eviction cases, because eviction cases rarely go to trial. They often end in a settlement. And so the landlord will want, basically the landlord wants 2 things. The landlord wants their money and they also want possession of the unit. So there are sort of 2 general types of deals that we usually try to negotiate. One is a deal where that we call a pay and stay, where a tenant will stay in their apartment, but they have to come up with a payment plan to pay their rent. Or you can negotiate what we call a waive and go, where the tenant will give up possession of the unit, leave the apartment, and the landlord will agree to waive their rent. So in this case, our clients felt really strongly that they wanted to try and leave their apartment and have their landlord raise their rent. But the problem was that because they were undocumented, they didn't have a credit history, and that made it really, really hard for them. It's already so hard to find an affordable place to live in the Bay Area, and the fact that they didn't have a credit history made it even harder. So in this case, we had some really difficult conversations where we were sitting down with these clients with, their two kids, two older kids in the car in the parking lot, the mom with an infant on her hip. And we had to look these clients in the eye and say, we need to talk about the possibility that we negotiate a deal where you agree to leave and you don't have a place to go and you end up in a family shelter. And that is just sort of, for me, the epitome of what it is to work in legal services and work directly with people. Because in moments like those, the injustice of our housing system is really, really real. And you're really looking someone in the eye and communicating that to them and working with them on finding a solution. So in this case, we had it was like a positive outcome, I want to say. We sort of got lucky, and a lot of this, a huge amount of credit goes to these clients who were so resilient and resourceful, and they tapped into their networks and were able to find an alternative apartment at the last minute. We were able to delay their case as much as we could by threatening to pursue discovery. And we got a deal that allowed them to move into their new apartment and waive their rent. So that is a happy ending for that story, but that case had some very difficult, challenging moments as well.
Yeah, and again, we do analogize our work in some ways to medical environments where you're choosing between bad options. And of course, we do think about what would the world look like where this problem didn't happen so regularly. I mean, Stacy just described dozens of cases per week coming on, and we do have a unique window to think about policy solutions. I know you worked, Saraswati, in other case types as well, and I wonder if our, I guess I'll call them listeners or our participants in the webinar may want to ask you some questions about those other case types. I do want to sort of start turning to the questions, but as I do so, Stacy, is there anything you might want to ask Saraswati, or you two want to talk about together, having heard her story? Stacy?
I just want to mention that immersive model that you were able to participate in of the clinic, where that's what you do full time for a semester, just sounds incredible. That was obviously a much later development than when I was working at the law project, and that sounds like an amazing experience.
It really is analogous to the sort of residency or clinical rotation model from medical school that law school has been very slow to adopt. And in fact, Stanford is a real innovator in having this full-time clinical model. It's one of the incredible advantages of our being on the trimester or the quarter system as opposed to the semester system, is it frees up a credit structure that enables a full-time quarter in clinical work. But it is absolutely transformational. It's absolutely unique. And I should say, upwards of 85% of students at Stanford Law School take advantage of one of these clinics. The uptake is significant. Dean Martinez mentioned there are 11 clinics. So it's not that 85% of Stanford students are in the community law clinic, but that range of clinics, environmental law, immigrants' rights clinic, religious liberty clinic. We have both a criminal defense clinic and a prosecution project in Santa Clara County. So there's a wide range, international human rights clinic. So across many different subject areas and many different tribunals and courts and types of practice, these 11 clinics together serve 85% of the student body who have really, voted with their feet and said, yes, please, we want to have this experience before we graduate from law school. Saraswati, someone asked, how long did it take that eviction case to go from start to finish? And one thing we all know about is California law and the law of every state has created a uniquely swift way for landlords to evict tenants. So in a normal lawsuit, if anyone listening has been involved in a state court lawsuit, it might take years to go from the case being filed to having a trial, and therefore the pressure that results in an ultimate settlement. In California, that will take 4 to 6 weeks. So when Saraswati talks about delay, she means making it take more like 5 or 6 weeks instead of 2 or 3. By operation of statute, these things move very quickly. It's one of the reasons that they are good teaching cases, because a student like Saraswati can see one through from filing to resolution. But how long did yours take, Saraswati?
I think it was about 5 weeks because we only got a 1-week extension. So yeah, this family had 4 or 5 weeks to find a new apartment on an incredibly low income with no credit history. And it felt like an impossible task at the time. And they only found a place, I think, like a few days before our settlement conference with the landlord, where we actually hashed out a settlement deal. So it was, incredibly tight.
And just to be clear, because I know folks here are interested in Stanford and the education, when we talk about hashing out a deal, we're also talking about drafting very formal legal documents that have the force of law. Basically, our students are drafting contracts that then get approved by a court and have the force of law. So it's a very formal drafting process that, again, as Dean Martinez said, whether you go into legal services as your career or go work in a law firm, you will have had some experience of drafting a contract, being able to explain to your client what this paragraph does, what that paragraph does, what their risks and exposures are by virtue of signing the agreement. So it's very formal legal work, as well as what Saraswati is describing as some of the counseling and emotional work. There's also very specific legal tasks associated with doing this work. I'm looking at the Q&A. I'm trying to keep my eyes on both sides. One question for Stacy. I think folks are intrigued by, the volume of this practice. I mean, how do you handle doing one case at a time when the issue is enormous? The problem, the social problem of lack of affordable housing, of the gap, what I describe as the enormous gap in some communities, including Silicon Valley, the wage to rent gap that is just sort of guarantees non-payment of rent on an ongoing basis. How do we as lawyers sort of think about that?
That's an important question. And we know that eviction defense is not the answer. There are going to have to be broad policy decisions that create responses that are long-term effective. But we also know that any of those suggestions or policy ideas around are going to be either a long time getting through the legislature, or if you're talking about actually creating affordable housing, are just by their nature very long-term solutions. So we do consider ourselves, kind of getting back to the medical model, we're more the emergency room, right? We're dealing with problems that are acute right now, and we're doing a lot of triage. We're trying to identify tenancies that are maintainable. If somebody comes in and it may not be the nicest apartment, it may not be being kept up incredibly well, but if they're in a housing situation that they feel that they can continue to live in, where they've fallen behind in the rent, and we can figure out ways to negotiate with the landlord and maybe find some rental assistance to put in place, and we can patch something together to get them to the place where they can stay there. Those are the ones where we're going to put a lot of attorney resources into them. For everyone who has an eviction case, we're going to try to make sure that they don't default, that they're going to get that answer on file, that they're going to have that opportunity to have their day in court or their day at the settlement conference, as Sarah Swati is saying more realistically, but that they're not going to just have the sheriff knocking on their door in 2 weeks. So there's different levels. Some it's just if they're not an eviction proceeding, we're probably just giving them basic advice about what's going to happen next. Once they have the eviction proceeding, at least get the answer on file, and then identify that minority of cases where we really can keep them in a sustainable tenancy that may not be formally subsidized housing, but it is for San Mateo County essentially affordable housing. And so we're working on a number of different fronts at once.
Someone has asked what I think is a really important question about sustainability, personal sustainability of this work. How, and I would ask both of you to reflect on. I mean, Saraswati, you're embarking on your first post graduation job where you'll be doing this work full time. And Stacy, you yourself have been in this work for decades and have supervised and overseen a lot of young lawyers and then mid-career lawyers and senior lawyers who have dedicated their lives to this work or to a stint in this work. How do we think about secondary trauma, sustaining ourselves, continuing to do good work when we do have real proximity to some real pain that goes on in our region? I'd love to hear your reflections on that. Saraswati, how have you started thinking about that as you embark on the journey?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and one that I would very much welcome thoughts from Stacy about. I talked to a therapist, and I find that incredibly helpful. We talked a lot about clinic during my first quarter of clinic, just sort of processing the sort of new, sort of awesome responsibility of being someone's advocate, and also some of the stories that I was hearing from clients. So luckily, Stanford heavily subsidizes therapy for students. I know that it's not affordable for everybody outside of that context. Yeah, I think also I've tried to ask myself more, does this need to get done today? Or can you leave and go watch a movie with friends? We'll try to do that more. I also just think something that I'm trying to do is sort of find the housing equivalent of the volunteer work that I used to do with Open House, because I think it can be really helpful to sort of connect with your local community in a sort of in like a non-professional environment, a community environment, so I'm hoping to do some more sort of volunteer work on the side with tenant unions in the South Bay. It's something that I'm sort of like just starting to do, and I find it really empowering and a great way to just connect with people outside of work in a way that's not unrelated, but feels like totally different, a different part of your brain, and much more sort of about community building. Yeah, but I would love to hear from Stacy as well.
Yeah, it's a hard issue, and it's something that we didn't talk about when I started practicing in this area many years ago. And I'm really happy to hear that it is something that, I hear the discussion among my peers, and I hear that it's happening at the clinic too, and that's amazing. It is a difficult area, not just for the attorneys, but for everybody who's interacting with clients and hearing those stories every day. Secondary trauma is a real factor. And I think we address it, try to address it in a number of different ways. One is just through making sure that we are aware of it and talk about it, and that the teams are supportive of each other. So we probably wouldn't talk about it as much in staff meeting, but maybe when the housing team meets or the immigration team meets, that's a place where they can share that with their direct peers that they're working with every day and talk about what's going on. We do also have an attorneys meeting every 2 weeks, and that's a place where attorneys can share stories that were particularly, they can ask for help on legal issues. That's one of the reasons to have an attorney meeting, but they can also share stories about what was difficult and what's going on with their clients' lives and how that's impacting them. And then more formally, we do training we offer training in secondary trauma and how to manage self-care and around secondary trauma. And also we offer an employee assistance program. So it's not long-term therapy, but it is the availability of short-term counseling if there's something in particular that is somebody needs to address.
One thing that has come up already in this new spring 23 cohort that I'm launching right on the other side of this wall from me this very week. One thing we talk about a lot is the two meanings of the Stanford Community Law Clinic. On the one hand, of course, we are here to serve the communities that surround Stanford and the community members who need our legal services. But we also are very intentional about building community within our office, sort of as you're saying, Stacy and Saraswati both, that being in community with others who share your values, your questions, your concerns, your experiences really does help with some of the isolation and some of the reality checking. Like, it's not me, this is kind of messed up, right? Like, this keeps happening, I feel powerless. And to hear like, that's because you are a little bit powerless when it comes to the macroeconomic forces that we're up against. But so you're not wrong, but how can we find a little bit of power to combat that hopelessness feeling? And doing that in community, I think really makes a huge difference. And one thing, just returning it to the sort of educational environment at Stanford, one thing that anyone who's watched, any legal education pop culture, sees that giant classroom with a big scary professor and 150 students and a sort of scary performative adversarial moment. Please state the case. There is an isolation in the academic pursuit of law where it's just you and an exam at the very end of the quarter, and having the collaborative learning environment here that is much more realistic about how most lawyers go through life. We say lawyering is a team sport, but you start off in the first year and a half sort of alone in a lane by yourself trying to figure out how to swim. There is a great relief, I think, in that, and we really try to inspire students to look, again, regardless of their area of law or the type of practice, to look for a supportive community that is going to sustain them over a career, over a life of meaningful work in the law. You really need to have your peeps around you, whoever those peeps might be for you, but watching for them and prioritizing that, especially if you want to do public service work, which has, so much trauma associated with it. We only have time for maybe one more question. Lots of kudos and thanks from the audience. Maybe, Stacy, could you talk a little bit about outreach and how do folks in the community, maybe facing both how do potential clients, how do you get the word out to potential clients, but also community members who might want to support your work or contribute in some way, be it financially or as a volunteer? What's the messaging of the Legal Aid Society all about?
Yeah, in some ways, we're no different from any small business in that we have a website, we have social media, channels that we use. We try to get information out through those channels. We also send out newsletters and that sort of thing. But really, in terms of client-facing outreach, the most important thing is our community partners, because many low-income people who are having problems might not necessarily even identify them as legal problems straight up front, right? They have a problem, they don't know what the shape of it is or what the right tools are to solve it. And so they're going to go maybe to the Fair Oaks Community Center or one of the other community-facing organizations that are embedded and resident in their, the neighborhoods that they live in. And those people are the ones that we make sure that we maintain really close relationships with, so that they know, oh, this actually is a legal issue. And let me tell you how legal aid can help. And here's the phone number. So really, that's the core. This is the two strategy is the more public facing sort of technology platforms. And then, but the real core for making sure that we're trusted partners for our clients is to work through partners that they already trust.
Oh, and I see Teresa's put the website for Legal Aid Society in our chat, so please enjoy. You'll see Stacy and amazing stories of the work that she and her team do. I'm going to turn it over for a closing to Megan Sweezy Fogarty of Stanford's Office of Community Engagement. But before I do, thank you so much. I love working with you both, Saraswati and Stacy. Thank you for saying yes to sharing some of your incredible work with the community that's interested in Stanford's impact. So thank you so much. Megan, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Juliet, and thank you for this wonderful program. So good afternoon, everyone. As Juliet mentioned, I'm Megan Sweezy Fogarty, and I'm honored to lead Stanford's Office of Community Engagement and close today's program. Today's program was special for me personally, as my father attended Stanford Law School after service in World War II. And he went on to serve as an attorney with the state of California and was a proud alumnus until his passing in 2020. As Juliet conveyed, we are indeed in an acute post-COVID relief environment. The recent Silicon Valley Index conveyed that inequality continues to widen in our region. 23% of our residents live below the poverty threshold, and most of us are spending between 30 and 50% of our income on housing. It's an exciting time for Stanford scholars and students to dedicate our mission of research and teaching to making a difference on these challenges. And I'm deeply proud of the Stanford Law School, but also the Stanford vision that focuses on partnerships to accelerate solutions to pressing problems, including poverty and inequality. If you live or visit our area, I invite you to stay involved with Stanford University as we collaborate on local to global needs. In particular, you can learn about events open to the public at events.stanford.edu. Spring quarter kicked off this week, and continuing studies classes are getting underway. Our museums and performing arts venues are open, and spring sports have started. So please do enjoy the campus. It's also a wonderful time to enjoy the beauty of campus in the spring. The water has led to just wonderful flowers all over campus. And I encourage you to discover the public art and architecture, to walk the Stanford Dish or even Lake Lagunita that is full this year. And today I just want to close by saying thank you for participating in Discover Stanford for You. Please let us know your thoughts on today's event when you get the survey or suggest future topics. Reach out to me and Stanford University through community.stanford.edu. And we look forward to connecting further as we all work towards a better future. Have a wonderful afternoon.